I absolutely love that we get to do this podcast, Natasha. And this week was exceptional. We got to sit down with Kevin Carlin, and he's the regional sales manager at Claremont Insurance Services. And Claremont Insurance Services is a GA, or a general agency, for those that don't know. And he's in our industry. It was incredible to sit down and hear his story. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we don't always get to talk to people who are also in insurance. And so we don't quite get to understand some of those depths. So there was a lot of material or content and stories that related to us, which was really cool. And I think a big part of his journey was how many different roles he's had and companies he's worked for, which some people might see as, they look at that and think that that's not a great thing. But the way that he shared his perspective, I'll let him share that in the story. But just really great to see somebody be so flexible and agile, and that's actually done well for him in his career. So it was a great conversation.
Yeah, and I loved how he balanced that with the human side and his personal stories that really just hit home, and I think everybody's really going to appreciate. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Tell Us Your Story.
Welcome to Tell Us Your Story. Join us as we step into the arena with business owners, leaders, and influencers. Hear their stories as they navigate challenges, opportunities, and victories on their journey to success. As Theodore Roosevelt once said, it is not the critic who counts, but the man or woman who is actually in the arena.
I was born in Pasadena, California, and my parents met at Pasadena City College. So my dad played baseball there, and so they met, and yeah, it's a good thing they did, obviously. So anyway, one of four boys in the Carlin family. So it was John, Pat, myself, and then Chris. My dad, who's very Irish Catholic, so he said if he knew he was going to have four boys, he would have named us Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that would be problematic for me because I'm barely pulling off Kevin. I don't think I can do Luke. So Luke is way up there. Anyway, so happy childhood. We played sports like a lot of families, a lot of kids. We played the major sports, baseball, basketball, football, and, with the four of us, we competed over everything. The last piece of pizza in the box, no one was shy about grabbing it because we knew we were a very middle-class family. There was no other pizza coming after the first one. So anyway, but we had a great childhood. I think we moved around a little bit. So very early on, we were in Duarte, which is a suburb of Pasadena next to Monrovia. Yeah. And then we moved up to Lake Arrowhead. And this was a really interesting chapter in the Carlin family. So we were in Lake Arrowhead in the late 60s, early 70s. My dad ran a camp, and this was a camp where different religious groups would come up for the weekend. Oh. So one weekend it would be the Seventh-day Adventists. The next weekend it was born-again Christians. And the next weekend it was the Buddhists coming. So it was always interesting. It was an education. Yeah. And then, we had our neighbors that were very far away. So it was kind of a different way to grow up. And one of the things that I did when I was young was just start shooting baskets. We had a basket court. So I was just shooting baskets all day long. And later, when we would move to Mission Viejo, which is really where we spent most of our time, that's the house that my parents are still in today. At first, when I was getting to know some of my new friends in my elementary school, they thought I was some kind of basketball prodigy. But what they didn't realize is there was nothing else to do in Lake
all
Arrowhead,
that work
so I was
paid
just
off.
shooting baskets, yeah.
So Lake Arrowhead. So I grew up in Anaheim, California. So I know Lake Arrowhead.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about as you're going through like your middle school years and then into high school. Were you a good student? Were you school something you liked?
Yeah, so I think, I was fairly social in elementary school and junior high school, but when we got into the high school area was when things changed for me, and not necessarily in a great way. So I ended up going to El Toro High School, which was a great public high school in Lake Forest. But, 80% of the kids that went to El Toro came from Serrano Junior High. I went to Los Alisos Junior High, so a lot of my friends went to Laguna Hills High School. So that was a big deal for me, and I really got off to a slow start in my high school years socially. And I don't know that I ever recovered from that. So high school was rough for me. I just kind of survived high school. My brother John and my brother Pat, I think, did much better, and certainly my youngest brother Chris, who went to Trabuco Hills, because that wasn't there when we were there.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, high school, I was not a great student in high school. I did just enough to get by.
And were you playing basketball? Did you end up?
No, that was another, that's a sore subject, Anna. Yeah, so what happened with high school basketball, so obviously my skills had, kind of come back to earth, if you will. And so I tried out from our freshman basketball team, and we had a pretty good-sized school. There was about 3,000 kids at the time. And I was the last person cut for the freshman basketball team. And again, not that I needed any more, negative things happening to me, but that sent me reeling because basketball is my first love. A lot of people look at me and they assume football, but basketball was, I was a little more slender, during my high school years. So basketball was my first love. And so getting cut from my freshman basketball team. And I wish I had a redemption story where I came back the next year and, did wonderful things, but it never really happened that way.
Devastating. No matter what. So, like your freshman year, any type of rejection is just like, oh, we're off to a tough start here.
Yeah, and I think I was fairly honest with my assessment of my skills then. I really should have been on that team. But I mean, I don't want to relitigate it 45 years later.
So are you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Are you and your three brothers, are you all close in age? Like, were you in high school at the same time?
Great
or
question.
Did you have
So John was a senior when I was a freshman. My brother Pat was a junior when I was a freshman. But Chris was 8 years later from me. So Chris was well after the main three of us. So so we had a different relationship with Chris than we did with Pat and John.
Was Chris a surprise?
Yes. Okay. Very much so.
Usually when there's that gap,
exactly. Yeah.
Mom and Dad were they were done.
They thought they were done, and then boom, bonus baby. Yeah.
Back on the basketball. So both of my boys played basketball. I was in that community. I love basketball, and I remember watching kids throughout the years that just they either got to a different team or they got cut when they got to high school, and it was so hard to watch all of that come to fruition. It's like, all that work you put in.
Yeah, and it could, at that age, you're just so sensitive. Most kids, some kids are more resilient than others about getting rejected and moving on, but yeah, it really sent me reeling back then. So, but the good news is I found myself in my college years, and I had the most unbelievable college experience ever. So I feel very blessed.
Well, let's talk about that. So when you were in high school, what was the dream?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't have a dream back then. So I was just kind of, like a lot of male students in their high school years, I was kind of just focused on sports and doing just enough to get by on the academic side. And, my parents were very strict with us about school. So I did, but I still just did barely enough to get by. I was in advanced placement classes, but I wasn't like excelling. I wasn't, and then, my mom one day came to me my junior year in high school. I'll never forget this. And she said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about this school, the University of San Diego." And I didn't know much about it. I knew that it was a Catholic school, and I just pictured nuns and priests walking around campus. But I knew that we couldn't afford it. Again, my dad, was a State Farm insurance agent, but 4 boys, big family. I just really didn't think it was a realistic thing. And whether or not I could even get accepted with my borderline SAT score and my borderline grades. But my mom drove down on a Saturday and took me to go see the school. And the girl that came to be the guide was straight out of Central Casting. She was a tall, beautiful blonde, and I didn't hear anything on the 3 or 4 hour tour. It was just like
they might have done that on purpose.
Yes, I'm sure. So, but what was interesting was there were 7 or 8 other pretty girls, and me and one other guy that were the prospective students, and all of our parents. And I just, again, I was just like, wow. And this beautiful campus, if you ever go down to the San Diego, University of San Diego is a stunning campus. So I felt very blessed. But again, I thought this was window shopping. I didn't think, A, I would get in, and B, I didn't think we could afford for me to go there. And my mom told my dad that she would go to work in his State Farm agent office if that would help with the bills at University of San Diego. So what a sacrifice, my mom, I think I was upset with her that day because I didn't think this was real. And,
why would you show me this?
I could be watching college football, right? So I'm like mad at my mom. And on the way back, I was walking that back. I said, "Mom, the professors we met with today, I really think it's in line with my goals in life. And I think I should go here, And meanwhile, I was just thinking of the girls that I saw.
Typical young boy.
Yes.
So how did it come to be that you got into the school?
So I didn't apply to any other schools. Again, I was just going to do what I saw a lot of my friends do, which is go to the nearby junior college, which was Saddleback Junior College. That's where a lot of kids went. And especially kids, around my socioeconomic level. And so I just always assumed that's what I was going to do. And we applied. I applied for I sent in the application, and the next thing you know, I get an acceptance letter. And then that's when the issues really start, because how are we going to pay for this? But, the University of San Diego was very generous back then in the late 80s. It was the mid to late 80s, and I think there were some Pell Grants and all kinds of aid that came together, which really was a blessing. And then, I took out some student loans, and so...
Don't we all?
Yes.
Don't we all?
But I never saw a bill for my student loan. My dad insisted on paying that, so he did. And
that's a blessing.
It was, the whole thing was a blessing, because when I got on campus, my life changed.
And what was it? So walk us through what was your major, and then what did the focus and dream start to be from there?
Well, I think, when my parents, I'll never forget when my parents dropped me off, because I was scared to death. I was a very young, however old I was at the time, in 1985, I was 18? I was a young kid, younger than most. And so, but one thing I told myself is, I have a chance to redefine myself from my high school years, where I was kind of out of sorts, and I just felt like I was kind of coming into my own. I had this confidence now that I was at this school that I really didn't deserve to be at, and I was just so excited. So I when I got to USD, I quickly met a bunch of great guys that were on, our floor. It was San Miguel dorms and down in the valley at USD, and I just won't ever forget it, because I met all these great guys, and we were getting along so well. There was a group of kids from Chicago, and they were all different parts of Chicago, but they invited me back to visit Chicago my freshman year during the intercession break, which was a pretty extensive break. It's 5 or 6 weeks. So I was able to go back there for a week and visit my friends in Chicago, and they took me all over to the old stadium for the Blackhawks.
Oh, wow.
I got to go to a DePaul basketball game, and I was a huge DePaul fan when I was a kid watching basketball on NBC. And then the craziest thing was they invited me to Soldier Field, where I watched the 1985 Chicago Bears in the NFC Championship game beat the LA Rams and Eric Dickerson. So, that Bears team went on. Yeah. That was the special team with McMahon and Walter Payton and Fridge. And so what an experience for me to, early on in my USD career, to get adopted by these Chicago kids that took me around like that.
And was that one of the first times you were traveling outside of California? Yeah.
Yes.
So massive, just...
On every level. It was growth, and it was just... I just felt so lucky to know these people. They were all so interesting. The Chicago kids knew everything. They identified a lot by their nationality, which was something different for me. They're, Irish, Polish, German. And then they were very into local politics. So they were talking about Mayor Daley and Verdoliak, the councilman. And, they knew all of these aldermen. And I just was fascinated about how well-versed they were in all these areas.
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
Worldly experience for you. That's what college is for. So are you, as far as academics, did you have a major that you were going... Did you decide on kind of what you were going to do? Yeah,
I ended up settling on international relations. So that's, you can see the correlation with employee benefits, which is exactly zero. But I was interested in history and politics. And so, it was a good major for me. But I thought I would just, maybe get a law degree. But then I took the LSAT, and I think I got a negative score. I don't know what happened. The LSAT people just called me and said, listen, not only are you not allowed to be a lawyer, you're not allowed to be in the legal profession. So
that's funny.
That was a humbling moment for me. One of many.
So as you transition out of college, where does your career start? What does that look like?
Okay, so fast forward to now, senior year of college. I'm looking around, and I'm like, everyone seemed to have plans, right? They were going to do this or that. Then there were some people like me that had no idea what they were going to do. And so I was looking at some of the companies that were coming to interview on the campus. And I'll never forget this. Another poignant moment. I see the silhouette of Abe Lincoln, and it's Lincoln National Corporation. I had no idea what this company did. But Lincoln National Corporation sounded so serious and impressive. And the whole silhouette of Abe Lincoln, I was like, I got to interview with these people. So I did. And then I found out, oh my gosh, they sell group health and employee benefits to companies through insurance brokers. And so the next thing you know, I passed the first interview, and I was on a plane ride to Fort Wayne, Indiana for a second round of interviews. And so I passed that test, and I was one of 12 people selected from around the country to be in their group school in 1989, which is really cool.
It's really cool. And I'm going to ask you this question. I've told Natasha this for years. I've never met anybody that in their formative years, in their high school years before they go to college, it says, I'm going into the health insurance space. Have you?
No, never. It's all, we all
us.
accidentally find our way here, and it's so true. Absolutely, yeah. And it's a serious question. It's a serious challenge for companies in our industry to how do they develop and find new talent? And they can go comb the college campuses. That's one area, one way they can do it. But as you guys know, if you look at our industry in California, the average age of a broker is something like 56, 58 years old. It's, so yeah, it's an industry question to be solved for sure.
And it's not just getting them in, it's who's willing to put in. Like when I look back at my career and I look at let's say 10 years I put in really learning how to sell health insurance, and you say 10 years, you have to make a lot of mistakes before you learn expertise. It takes a long time to say, I'm proficient at this trade in group benefits, employer benefits.
Oh yeah, it couldn't be more complicated, and it's only gotten worse over the last 30 years that I've been in it, where it's just gotten increasingly complex. I mean, in the 90s when I was in the industry, it was more about, with brokers, it was more about remembering all the health markets, because there were all these little small health plans. Care America, Take Care, FHP. They've all been swallowed up by larger companies now, but back in the 90s, brokers would forget about those companies. And so that's how broker of record changes would happen within the industry. But then we get into the 2000s, and all of a sudden it's compliance and it's details around the plans. And so you need to be an ERISA attorney. And then it also gets to be about technology. And so all of a sudden, being a great insurance broker includes all of those things and more. So my hat's off to both of you for being able to tackle it.
And that's the starting off, coming in, not just learning it, but having the tools. And there's not that instant gratification. I would say it's no, there are definitely benefits to it, but you have to learn, and you might not have all these fancy tools or things like that. It's tough for the newcomers, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
So as you're learning this at Lincoln, so take us back. Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole. Coming back to Lincoln, where does that take you?
So I went through the Lincoln Group School, which was just amazing. I mean, I went back and looked at my salary back then in 1989, my offer letter, and it was $21,000. And I thought, that might as well have had a couple of zeros behind it, because I thought I was big guy on, And so anyway, went through the Lincoln Group School. It was just a fantastic experience. We were daily quizzes, weekly tests, videotaped presentations, role playing. It was the best training you could ever hope for. And then we all got assigned to different group offices, and I got assigned to the Woodland Hills office. So I was an Orange County kid, so Woodland Hills was way up in the San Fernando Valley. So I learned from a couple of senior people in the office, Jim Schaff and Robert Friedman, and I delivered a lot of hard copy proposals back then. And that was still, back then in the early 90s, brokers expected you to send them hard copy proposals with your quote. The industry's changed so much now, you would never do that. But back then, that was a big part of the job. And that was a big part of my learning curve. It's hey, Kevin, there's a broker in Pacoima we need you to drop off this proposal for.
Oh, I love it. So we always, a lot of what we talk about is mentors and the themes that come through. So you remember those names. I would imagine they had such a big impact on your overall career.
Oh, yeah. And, there was one guy, Bill Eicher, he's now at Hub International, but Bill, was a year older than me, and so he just took me under his wing. And later, when Lincoln, changed for both of us, and Lincoln got out of the group benefits business, Bill went to MetLife in Long Beach when they were still selling group health. And not everyone remembers this, but I, Bill was nice enough to bring me along with him. And so I really appreciate, some of that loyalty and that support from Bill, amazing.
It's always amazing how a right leader or a right mentor can, it's going to influence the trajectory of your career, either in good or bad. I always love hearing the good. We often hear the bad. I love hearing about the good.
Yeah.
So continue to walk us through. So there's Lincoln, and then how does your career progress?
So, my first decade is just crazy. So I'll just walk you through it quickly. But so Lincoln ended up, Lincoln, in 1989 was selling a lot of minimum premium, alternate funded medical cases. And they were kind of the carrier of last resort where people would go to if they didn't know what to do with a group. But they were losing money. And finally in 1992, Lincoln just said, we can't do this anymore. And so they sold their group benefits operation their benefits business to Great West and also Take Care Health Plan, which was a small regional HMO in Concord, California. So that's where, I went, and I was there for about a year, and then Take Care got purchased by FHP, another HMO. And so I talked to my brokers. They didn't love FHP. And so I said, okay. That's when I joined Bill Iker at MetLife in Long Beach. And true to form, as soon as I got there, I was there about a year, they merged with Travelers to form Metra Health. Not a very sexy name. I was never a fan of Metra Health. But we were there another year or two, and then Metra Health was purchased by United Healthcare. And so this was just a dizzying number of acquisitions. It changed everything for me. And it just got to be too much at some point with United. They made some pretty heavy-handed changes that none of us really liked. And so most people were looking for another opportunity. And so I went to the broker side. I went to work for Andy Griffin at Seabury and Smith in Newport Beach. And Seabury was owned by Marsh and operated within Marsh. And so there was Seabury and Smith, and there was Mercer on the EB side. So we were getting walked into accounts like Jamba Juice and Whitecap. And it was pretty heady stuff for me. I was like, hey, this is really cool. But of course, it was short-lived because what was next? Another acquisition. It was like the harbinger of doom. Everywhere I went, there was another merger or acquisition. This time, Marsh decided to buy Johnson & Higgins, the largest privately held brokerage in the United States. So this is late 90s. And all of a sudden, instead of me and Andy and his assistant doing at Seabury, we had 23 people from Costa Mesa J&H come over, and that changed everything again. So yeah, crazy first decade, and it never really slowed down from there. In the 2000s, I worked for an HSA administrator. I also worked for a company that did HR outsourcing, Empyrean Benefits. I worked for Ace USA, which was a huge property casualty insurer, and I sold accident and health products at Ace. So just a crazy career, and just different things happened along the way.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just moving around so much can be very uncomfortable for people. So going through all that's different leaders, that's different peers, that's different company names, lines of business, all of that. So just curious going through that, because I don't think some people might have said, yeah, this just isn't the industry for me, right? And completely jump ship. So any advice there for somebody that's going through?
Yeah, I was a glutton for punishment. And I am sort of noticing that there is, maybe I was ahead of my time, but it seems like today there's a lot of people that I see in a job for a year or two, and then they go to another company. And so I know that can happen to people, and it can be unsettling. Sometimes it's your own choice. I made some bad choices in my career. I managed my career terribly, but I just kept going, and I kept believing in myself. And I told myself, listen, the best thing I did along the way is I grabbed a person or two or three from every place I've ever been, and I've stayed in touch with those people. And so even if I was in a place that maybe I didn't think was great, I tried to find the good parts in it. And I didn't always succeed in some of these roles. I've had my share of failure, and I've just kept going. And thankfully, someone's always wanted me eventually. I had a rather poignant moment in 2009 when I lost my job working for a small regional broker. I tried the broker side a second time and failed again. So this time I had a substantial amount of unemployment afterwards. And I remember, it was, I think in total about 8 months of unemployment, and it was very humbling, and I really got scared. I just thought to myself, do I still have a place here? It was almost like musical chairs, and they were all gone. And I remember at some point, a couple months before I found the job that I got, I remember there was a job offered to me, and I really agonized about it because it was outside the industry, and it would have been me starting over. And I swallowed hard, and I decided to just keep trying for just a few more months. And then what happened was a miracle. Humana down in Orange County was looking for a large group salesperson, and there were a lot of people that wanted that job. And I showed up, and my brother John bought me a new suit, and he was my biggest cheerleader. And, I just showed up that day, and I remember giving myself a pep talk in the car because it was a round robin. It was a little intimidating. There were about 5 different practice leaders in from all over the U.S. for Humana that were going to decide who they hired. And, I just gave myself a pep talk in that car that day and just said, you're going to get this job. And you're going to, because I was having a little bit of that imposter syndrome where I was just, my confidence was shaken a little bit.
Yeah. And so you've said so much in there that is so important to me. And I think a lot of people, one, when I speak to somebody, especially younger generations, my children are 31 and 27 and 23. And they'll say, what's more important to you is, sometimes the conversation will be experience or service. I'm like, well, both of those are very important. I was like, but experience, and then talking to you, like when someone sits down to you to talk about their benefits, there's all of these changes that I could see the matrix happening. Like you're like, oh, I remember, and this, I've been through this, and that experience is so valuable. And it's hard to tell sometimes the younger people, like this hard time you're going through right now is going to be the foundation that you live on in 10 years from now, because you're building something that other people are going to walk away from, which fortunately you didn't.
Yeah, the Humana thing was such a big time in my career because I managed to get the job offer, and there were a lot of people that wanted the job. And then I heard there were some people that wondered why they hired me. Mm-hmm. And I already had a huge chip on my shoulder even when I got hired, because, there were a lot of people obviously that could have hired me that didn't, right? So that motivated me. I was already motivated. And when I got to Humana, I asked for their list of small or large group sales. I was hired to sell 100 plus. And I asked them, do you have a quote log from last year for your 100 plus? And do you have a list of all the 100 plus sales? And the first list was much smaller than I thought it would be. And the next one, the sales were very small. And I thought to myself, ooh, okay. And then I just got to work, and I just outworked everybody. And I just put my head down. I stayed late. I worked weekends. I made phone calls. I tried to communicate with brokers in every which way: social media, phone calls, in-person meetings. I networked, and I was just relentless. And it took me about 7 months. And I will always remember this sale that I made. It's an 900 life employer, and they had about 50 employees in Anaheim and 800 or 900 in Dallas, Texas. And the group was with principal. They had a $24 single rate. They were renewing at $25. So what am I doing quoting on what is obviously a bid check? And I came in at around where they were currently at, but Humana had some really cool features on their plan. And I went and met with the broker, and I put a lot of extra work in, and I actually did bring some hard copy proposals. I scanned the logo of the company and really wanted to do a good job. And just, if I couldn't sell this case, I wanted to make an impression. And he said, Kevin, I only have 20 minutes for you. Well, he kept me there an hour and a half, and he kept asking questions. And so all of a sudden, I'm selling this case, and then that's when the magic started, where after I sold that group, I didn't mention them by name. I just told other brokers, I just sold a 900 life group, fully insured, dental and vision. You did? Really? Humana? So all of a sudden, I was selling, next thing, I sold a casino with 1,500 employees. I sold a PEO with 1,200.
Wow.
I sold a cheese company with 400 or 500. And it just, it was it was unbelievable what happened from there. And it was just magical. It was a lot of good luck, but it was also a lot of hard work. And it was just the perfect storm. And that was probably the most successful time in my career, I think.
That's incredible. So one, I don't believe in luck. And when we have this debate, I believe in the hard work positions you. And then the credibility, to your point of being able to say that you sold that one, opened up. But that's all of the things that nobody saw. This is where I get excited of the 8 months that you were going through and torturing yourself and waiting and staying committed. And I would imagine studying and understanding and keeping, all of that goes into that sale. So kudos to you.
And it's still all the way to today, we've managed a lot of teams, and that's a part of it is, and you notice this in business partners and clients, if you see somebody that goes the extra mile, they bring you the hard copy or they put your logo on there. It matters more than you think. And I've had many successes where I'm like, oh, I didn't really think it was a big deal. I just was like, oh yeah, just, why wouldn't I do that? And they just are thankful. So that's what I love to hear, is that you were putting in the extra, and it's bound to get noticed.
Yeah, it's funny because I always remember in the first month or two that I worked at Humana in Irvine, there was a girl that I worked with. Her name was Clarissa, and I always remember it was around 5:30 one afternoon, and I had all these snail mail like things that I just printed off to send to brokers. I must have had 40 or 50 of them, and she said, "Kevin, what are you doing? Are you going to stay late again?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Well, no one really does that here." And I said, this is a really important time in my career. I have to make this work. And so she kind of looked at me quizzically and kind of, okay, but I think she didn't really fully understand how obsessed I was with succeeding. Mm-hmm. And I think Humana's rates had been out of the market for a long time. So I think there had been some malaise amongst their sales team, because it was kind of quiet in the years previous. But talk about luck. Humana's appetite increased as I was starting to write more of these fully insured groups. So it was a lot of fun to, very gratifying success for sure.
Yeah. And so I want to dive in there because as you're talking through this, it sounds like there's a theme. You grab 2 to 3 people, you create a relationship. So we were talking about network, and now fast forward, I don't know that LinkedIn was there then, but it is now. And so when you look and think about how you network, can you talk about that for a minute and tell us your thoughts?
Yeah, LinkedIn is, first off, you will never find a bigger enthusiast for LinkedIn than me. I love LinkedIn. I love the cost. It's free. I don't pay for it. I know there's a paid version, but I've managed to skip by. But I just love so many things about LinkedIn. I love the immediacy of it. I love the efficiency of LinkedIn. I love the idea that I can post something and it goes out to a bunch of people. And as long as I'm posting something relatively compelling, and I know my messages I post a lot on LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn doesn't love me with regards to the algorithm because I post a lot. But I've seen some just magical things happen. And when I first started at LinkedIn, I think I looked and it was like the mid-2000s. It was 2006. But back then, there was nothing to do on LinkedIn. It wasn't a content-driven site. No one knew what to do. And there wasn't anything really to do except kind of post your resume. Slowly over time, LinkedIn morphed into this content-driven site where people were kind of showcasing their wares about business-to-business activities and sales. And yeah, it just turned into this thing for me where it was a great place for me to funnel a lot of my energy.
Yeah, and that's how we ended up getting connected. And I talked to Natasha and other people as well. So I post a lot as well. And it's not always the likes or the comments that you see on LinkedIn, but it's the relationships in the back end where people are like, hey, I have a question. You said something I didn't understand about this industry or this piece. Can we jump on a call? And these relationships have blossomed out of just thought leadership and sharing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, I should tell you, I made every mistake you can make on LinkedIn when I first joined. So I didn't know, and there's no roadmap. No one tells you. So if someone accepted my connection request, then I also thought they were accepting my sales pitch, which was probably coming 30 seconds after they accepted. So, that just is how it worked for me. And I learned by the fact that most people ignored, neglected, defriended, deconnected from me. I'd like, oh, okay, so yeah, maybe I need to do something different here. And over time, and it took me longer than it should have, I learned that you give value first. You showcase what you do and you help others, and then at some point you may be able to call on someone for a favor. But first you give.
Yeah, I think that's such a outside of LinkedIn, just in life in general. Yeah. Just by giving, I think it's a book, Giver's Gain, I think it is. I don't know if you've heard of it, but just being able to give without the expectation of getting anything in return, you'll be richer than you could ever imagine.
Yeah, The Go-Giver. It's Bob Berg, and I can't remember the other name, co-authored it, but great book. The parable is simple. It's, help others, and, people will remember you for helping them, and they'll think of you when they may have a need. And, so with LinkedIn, my interests weren't always so pure. So years ago, when I added all these insurance brokers, I thought, okay, this is good, right? And after a while, I got fatigued with insurance brokers and I started adding HR people. Mm-hmm. My interests weren't so pure. So my idea was, what if I add in all these HR people and I can reverse engineer some sales? I'm selling, dental in a crowded market where there's 15 or 20 options. So maybe I can get an HR person to ask their broker for Humana or whichever company I was at, California Dental Network. And that happened 3 or 4 times, and a couple times it was really good, but it didn't justify all the time I had spent. But what I did learn is all of a sudden I knew all these HR people, and a lot of them, especially during COVID, there was a huge dislocation for HR people where they were laid off or furloughed. And that's when I started helping HR people and started helping them find their new jobs. I started sending resumes and brainstorming with HR professionals on the phone and helping them. I just remembered back in 2009 when I was in transition and, I didn't ask anyone for help, but, I think everyone could use a kind of a cheerleader. And if I did anything, at least I was helping them get on the phone, cheer them up a little bit. A lot of times some of these HR people were kind of down. You just kind of, just talk to them a little bit and help them. And, that became really gratifying for me. And that remains true to this day, as I really love helping HR people.
Oh, I love it.
And the networks, I actually just last week listened to I don't know if he's the founder of LinkedIn or one of the founders, and I might mess his name up, but Reid Hoffman, I think it is.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, so he talked all about it, and he said they thought he was a part of PayPal and all this stuff, and they were like, oh, LinkedIn's not going to work. Like, that concept is just not going to work. And he was talking about how, to this day, people are using it in ways that, he didn't even imagine. He talked about one person going and finding profiles of people who had the job that this person wanted. And he's like, and I just started friending their friends, and I started looking at what they were posting, and I started looking at these companies, and then, sure enough, they land the job that they want. So it's such a tool, and there's so many ways to use it. I still get blown up every day, and I'm one of those that will ignore your 5th auto email. But if it's a real, something like this, we're sitting on a podcast, so, when things are different too. So it's such an engine if you use it. And of course you have other tools and other ways and, face-to-face and things like that. But it's growing, I think honestly.
Yeah. And, it's so easy. When I see someone, an HR person especially, or someone in employee benefits, someone who I can really help, who I've got a network to support, just hit share and it goes out to your network. And then, if people are interested, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, do you want to jump on a call and kind of brainstorm your search a little bit? And then I'll get their resume and send it out to 2 or 3 recruiters that I know are really good and they place HR people. And then, sometimes I've gone the further step of making them my LinkedIn contact of the day. And I don't know that it does anything, but it's just 3 or 4 paragraphs about their story. And I share it on LinkedIn, and it's just a way of introducing them to my network. And I let everyone know that they're looking, and here's where they're looking, and here's what the level of HR that they're at. So I think that's a small way. I think that's what all of us could do. It's the least that we can do to help people. Mm-hmm. There's so many people today right now that are in transition and really hurting. There's people that have been out of work 6, 12, 18 months, and it's sad.
It is. It's an incredible way. I tip my hat to you that you go that extra mile. The least I could do is tip my hat to you. It's pretty incredible.
Well, yeah, it's kind of just goes in my family. My mom taught us, always help others. And my dad, my dad, he was always working, doing things with Kiwanis. And so we would always go bowling, a lot of times with children that were developmentally disabled. And so from a young age, we sort of, we learned about giving back. And my dad is in his 80s now, and he's definitely aging, but in his 50s, 60s, and 70s, my father would drive to San Pedro and take the ferry over to Terminal Island, where he would pray and minister with prisoners. Oh, wow. And, that kind of goes back to his days where he was a probation officer in downtown LA. And I think he missed that outreach with, sort of disaffected, troubled youth. But so when you come from the background that I've come from, with my parents modeling really exemplary behavior, I don't think I've nearly lived up to what my mom and dad taught us. But and then of course my brother John, was amazing at giving back too. He kind of showed me the way.
Yeah, I want to touch on your brother John. You said he had bought you a suit and for that interview, so that stuck with you. So tell us about your brother.
So John was, we fought when we were younger, and it was just the way it was. But, John didn't love school. He did just enough to get by. And then he went to Saddleback College for 1 year, and he hated it, and he didn't do well, but he did it to appease my parents. But then he wanted to work in sports. And back then in the 80s, there weren't a lot of sports jobs. ESPN hadn't blown up yet, and there really weren't all these different things that you can do now. Back then, he thought he would have to be a broadcaster. So he started he would be the broadcaster for the Saddleback football games, and he would go and do all these things. And he eventually he went to sportscasters camp, and Bob Costas was there, and there was a guy named Roy Firestone, and Roy Firestone from ESPN. So John saw Roy speak at this broadcasters camp and then followed him to his car. And he said, Roy, I really enjoyed your talk. Do you think I could be an intern for you? And Roy said, John, we already have 6 interns, but maybe in 6 months, give me a call. And, he politely kind of, answered my brother. But John showed up at Roy Firestone's office the following Monday, and Roy wasn't there. And so John was all dressed up in a suit. They thought he was Mark Grace from the Cubs, who was the guest later. And so he just, he said to the receptionist, he said, oh, I'm here. I talked to Roy on Friday. And the lady says, oh, I didn't think we needed a new intern, but if Roy said, okay. So then John was there for 3 days. And finally on Thursday, Roy came in and he saw John and he said, what are you doing here? And John said, oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. And then, as Roy tells it, John just went on. They decided to keep him, and he just became invaluable. He started helping Roy with researching the gas. And all of a sudden, he was in the sports industry, and he kind of conned his way into it to be nice.
Forced his way.
What a story.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit more about John.
So John then went on to, work for the Best Damn Sports Show for Fox. So he was, all of a sudden he had done all he could do with Roy, and he was networking and helping people, which he did, all the time. And he got to Best Damn Sports Show, where he worked for 4 or 5 years, and that show became very big. And then he took the job that changed his life and was amazing. He was recruited by the Jimmy Kimmel Live show in Hollywood, which is not a sports show, but they did want some sports guests. So they invited John to join the show. And so John was there for the very first episode, and he worked there, throughout his entire life. And when he was at the Jimmy Kimmel show, he was obviously dealing with all of these sports agents and their clients, which included Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley, Tiger Woods, Serena Williams. The list is endless. And John, he shared all of these really cool things about his job with me and my family and everyone he knew. So we all got to attend tapings of the show. We got my daughter was able to go to the Jimmy Kimmel Live show and sit in Jimmy's office eating pizza with the other kids from the show. And meanwhile, right outside, they had shut Hollywood Boulevard down, and my daughter was able to go to concerts by Katy Perry and Taylor Swift and One Direction. These were huge things where they shut down all of Hollywood Boulevard. So John just, he really, the job wasn't always an easy job, but it certainly was a glamorous job, especially to those of us from the outside. And, John was just always helping people, and, just amazing that he connected people all the time. He found people jobs. The things that I do now today, I'm only doing it because John showed me that roadmap. But John was 10,000 times better at networking than I was. He could literally make one phone call and tell someone, you should hire George, or you should hire my friend Ray, and here's what he's good at and why you should hire him. And a lot of times it would be a one-call close. It was done. And, John built that up over time. And, even when John was diagnosed with ALS, which happened in 2016, that same day, he helped somebody on the show. Someone needed a favor, and John helped them on the same day that John was diagnosed with ALS. So that's just kind of, the person John was,
Yeah, incredible. And we had talked about it before. And when did he pass?
He passed in November of 2021. And I will say to the credit of the Jimmy Kimmel show, they let John work till the day he died. And, ALS was a struggle for John, but John had a lot of support, and there were just so many people that loved my brother and wanted to help him, not just family and friends, but coworkers and people, acquaintances. But John, there's some incredible stories about my brother. There was one where he was eating lunch, and he was 2-3 years into ALS at the time, but he was having lunch, and he heard someone in the booth next to him talking about sports. And so when that guy was leaving, John said, "Hey, I heard you. Do you work in the sports industry?" And the guy says, "No." He says, "We just have a little podcast." And John says, "Oh, well, why don't you come and visit me at," and he gave him his card and he invited him. And, I'll share with you guys later a letter this guy wrote to us because we didn't know this had happened. But apparently, John helped him get his podcast picked up. He introduced him to a ton of people. And the letter that Drew wrote to us after John passed was the most amazing letter. It's 2 pages. And I'll never forget it. I can think of parts of it right now, but Drew basically said that John changed his life, and he was a complete stranger. At the time, Drew felt like there was no hope left in Hollywood. He had met all these people who promised to help him before and never did. And then there was my brother who, even while he was fighting ALS, was still thinking about other people. And he was,
and he was in the booth next to him.
Yes. And
what a blessing.
Yeah, it was just random, but John, was always doing things like that. And he was just the single most generous person I've ever met. He was always doing for others. And sometimes we had to tell him, stop. I mean, I hate to shop, mainly because of my size. There's not a lot of stuff that fits me anymore. But John knew my size, and he would always buy me clothes, And so I never needed to shop because John always, he loved to go through the thrift stores in Beverly Hills. It was one of his favorite things to do, find deals for people. So, yeah, John was an amazing person.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing about him. And the time when we have these conversations does go really, really fast. I want to transition, and it's always difficult transition when talking about such an amazing person and then coming back to the work.
Yes.
But to transition back, can we spend some time on what you do now and where your career is now? And
oh yeah, that'd be great. So I feel like, all of the craziness that I referenced earlier has kind of had its purpose, right? So now I find myself 6 months in at Claremont Insurance Services, based in Concord. I work from my home in Huntington Beach, but I'm leveraging contacts that I've made throughout my entire career. And not all of these contacts are working with me currently because, we have some big competitors that are perhaps better known down in Southern California than Claremont is, but we're going to change that. And it's, it's a lot of fun to be the underdog, but Claremont has some amazing services, and I feel so lucky to be here. And now that I'm 6 months in, I feel so blessed to be here to work alongside just some incredible people, hardworking, professional. They're also the kind of people you would want to be around when you're not working. So I'm just really feeling blessed right now to be here.
Well, let me dive in a little bit. So
sure.
Our industry, the employer benefits, health insurance it's a web. Natasha and I always like to say it's a web. So not everybody, most people outside of our industry have no idea what a GA is. So why don't you take a minute, tell us what a GA is, what Claremont does, and how we can leverage your services.
Yeah, so a general agent is basically an intermediary between the broker or consultant and the employer. So what a general agent does is try to take things off of the insurance broker's desk and put it onto their desk and really help the broker save time and money by helping them with quoting. There's a ton of things that we do for our brokers. So we are boutique, we're independent. Our company, I think, is in full alignment with brokerages like yourself that are independent and a little smaller. But we help brokers pre-sale, talking about what plans to quote. We help them quote through our quoting tool, Health Connect. So we quote different plans for group medical, group dental, vision, life. And then we do provider and network comparisons because we obviously want to make sure that if a group is considering moving from Aetna to United Healthcare or Aetna to Blue Shield or Blue Shield to HealthNet, we want to make sure that the important providers, medical groups, hospitals are included. We also do benefit comparisons. So we make sure that there's not many, if any, takeaways. We always want to be quoting similar benefits or hopefully improving those benefits. And then we offer a lot of open enrollment support. So brokers can't be everywhere. And doing open enrollments, whether it's virtual or in person, we always try to be there for our broker partners. There's also technology. So as you know, ease is a big part of the small group world. And we support ease in a way that I don't think any general agent does in California. We will do ease and help the broker with our ease license if they just write one line of coverage with one of our carrier partners. So they could write group dental or group life, and we'll set up the entire group. We'll do the ease build. So there's just a lot of robust support that we provide our broker partners with. We also do free COBRA first year if there's over 20 employees. We do free premium only for a group that has at least 10. And then we have a new contract with our new carrier partner, HealthNet. And HealthNet has been on fire. The last 12 months, they set records in 2024, and 1/1 of 2025, they sold more business than they have since 2016.
Wow.
So HealthNet is big, and they've really focused up in Northern California, Central California. That's where they're writing a lot of their business. And they have the Cigna network for out of state. So we're really excited about HealthNet. I just found out this week that I made my first sale with HealthNet for a 4/1 effective date. So
congrats.
that's the start of our fiscal year.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really exciting. So, again, Claremont is an amazing company, and I think we benefit from further inspection. So we want brokers to, challenge us and ask us what we do, because we think we will win more often than not when we get into the details.
Yeah, and so when I talk to a lot of agents who are looking to open their brokerage, and now that we've opened our brokerage, we've been in business for a couple months now. Family, friends who don't know the industry, they're like, "How are you able to do all of this?" I'm like, "Well, that's where a general agency comes in. It's like having your own team versus doing it all on yourself." And we decided to work with Claremont, so we appreciate the relationship and look forward to bringing business. But it's such a great tool and service and support to not just the broker, but then the employer as well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we serve brokers. The brokers is the center of our universe, but ultimately we also serve the employer and the employees. So all we are trying to do is make the broker the center of the world. We always want to make our brokers the hero of the story every time. And, we know how many things you guys are challenged with providing your clients. It's crazy. Insurance knowledge, compliance, technology. I mean, there's just a million things that you guys have to be aware of. And so the more that we can be, idea merchants for you and just tell you what we see going on in the marketplace, I think that's valuable. And so it maybe we find something happening in the market that you guys aren't aware of, and we share that with you.
From the other side of it, it's funny with all the things that brokers have to do, having a GA partner is one of those things where it kind of is a relief. If we can't remember everything, we can't do everything, it's like you find the right partner. And especially we've worked with GAs for years, but going to say, "Hey, can we double check that underwriting?" or "Hey, here's my situation." I think the benefit of a GA can oftentimes be underrated. Like, people don't know exactly how much it can benefit them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another set of eyeballs when you're scrubbing a case. So now the employer's filled out all the paperwork and they've sent it back. And as you know, there's a million moving parts on every application. Mm-hmm. So we're a second set of eyes to scrub those apps. I think the carrier partners that work with Claremont love us because we are very meticulous about it. And so we just make sure that things go in right, implementations go well. And again, we always want to make sure the broker is the hero in the story with their employer clients. If they're going to trust us with that business, we take it very seriously. And so we are so excited to work with you, and we're excited to work with you in throughout the rest of this year and hopefully for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be a long time.
Yes.
So we have a couple of staple questions we like to ask. So my staple question is, how do you define success? And not necessarily in our employer space and our work, but for your story, for your life, how do you define success?
I think success for me is, being blessed to pay your bills and have friends and family and, make sure that you're living up to your commitments to the people in your life, right? So it could be coworkers, it could be friends, it could be family. I think just having a well-rounded life is important. And I feel successful when, I am exceeding in all those areas, which I certainly don't do, but I try. And, I think sometimes, we get out of focus or we lose our proportion, with our life. We start paying too much attention here or there. But I think balance is key. And I think just, I feel very blessed with the life I've had so far. And I think, it's all about choices, right? You can choose where to work, who to marry. All of those things are very important, and they'll end up dictating a big part of your happiness. Success to me, though, I think is, knowing, from a professional standpoint, it's just knowing that you've done your best every day, and that, when you're done with your work week, you can look back and say, "Hey, I got a lot done, and I helped," and especially at a company like Claremont, we're a smaller company, but I feel like we celebrate success here in a way that is unique. I have worked a lot of places. I've never seen a company like Claremont that has just a joy about doing this work. And as you know, sometimes it's mundane work. It can be, very detail oriented and meticulous and exhausting. But, I love the fact that our company celebrates all wins, big and small.
Oh, awesome.
I love that. And the mindset that goes along with it, it takes people with that mindset to really create kind of a successful environment. So I love that answer. My staple question is, it's going to take you back a little bit. So if you could talk to your 30-year-old self, knowing what you know today, being where you're at today, who you are today, if you could look back and talk to your 30-year-old self, what's one piece of advice?
I would say, this is very clear to me. This answer is the grass isn't always greener. So yes, I did have some changes thrust upon me with all these mergers and acquisitions I've been involved in. And again, I will put my record up against anyone's. The fact that I was even most recently at California Dental Network, acquired by Sun Life, laid off in August. So, but the advice I would give to younger people is, throughout your career, and especially in your 30s, you will be approached by other companies, and they will tell you a great story about how great it is to work at their company. And you just do your due diligence and make sure you manage your career better than I did mine. Because at some point, people will look at your past and they'll judge you for it. And whether or not it's fair doesn't matter. And I think there's some people now that, I look at their resumes and, I don't judge anyone because God forbid someone judge mine. My resume is littered. I look like an inveterate job hopper. But, I would just tell people to be very cautious about managing their career and think about the changes you make. Even if someone's just going to pay you a little bit more money, it just may not be worth it. Be very deliberate, be very cautious, ask a lot of questions. And then if you still feel like you want to make the move, then go ahead, But, don't just change jobs just because maybe things get a little tough in your role. I made a lot of changes in retrospect that maybe I shouldn't have made, but I think I managed the best I could. But I would tell anyone younger, the people that I admire most are the people I see that are at some company for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. I am in awe of those people. I think that's such a rare and amazing achievement. I don't know if it's always possible in today's environment to have those long careers with one employer, but nothing impresses me more than seeing that. And I'm always in awe of those people.
I love it. Big believer in the grass is green where you water it.
Yes.
So whether it's you watering it or the company watering it, you want to make sure that that's, not fake grass.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate you. I always appreciate our guests being so open, sitting with us and letting us just drill you with questions and take you down memory lane. So you've been very open. I think you have so much knowledge in the industry. We're excited to work with you, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm so flattered when you guys asked, and I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I look forward to future conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely appreciate it as well. And so I always want to give our guests the last moment to, if there's anything you want to share with the listeners, family, anybody. It's your story, so feel free to take a moment to share.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to be here at Claremont today. We're celebrating our spring break for the next couple of days. So I'm going to be meeting all the people I've been working with for the last 6 months remotely. So I'm going to see them in the next 48 hours and meet them. So that's exciting. And, just really excited to be where I'm at right now. I think, 2025, is already, a third over. So there's a lot of work to do. I have big goals to attain. And so I just really appreciate you guys asking me to do this podcast today. And I can't tell you how excited I am to see what the next 9 months are in 2025. So thank you again for having me.